All right, so let's get to the topic of today. Let me share the screen. So today we will be talking about neuroscience, and honestly, I'm not an expert on the topic, so I will appreciate if you share your understanding of it. But on the other hand, I find it really interesting, and yeah, it's really fascinating how you can draw this correlations between reinforcement learning and human learning and human motivation in general. So just let me find another thing quickly. Just a moment, I will get all right. So just I made this copied a couple of pictures to introduce the basics quickly, and yeah, I don't know, maybe just to memorize it better. So today we will be talking about the learning from neuroscience perspective. And to understand that, we will need some basic understanding of how the human brain works and how what are the building blocks. So the building block is a neuron, and in general, a neuron consists of this cell body, and it has dendrites, which are like incoming connections, and an axon, which is outgoing connection. And essentially, that's it about the neuron. And now we have this synapse. So synapse is like a place where two neurons connect to each other, and we have this presynaptic neuron, and you can see that it's axon of presynaptic neuron, and it connects to this postsynaptic neuron, and there is a synaptic cleft between these two, and you can see that there is this ion channel receptor on the side of postsynaptic neuron, and there are these neurotransmitter molecules coming from the presynaptic neuron. And so this is the main kind of picture of how two neurons connect and communicate. And there is this idea of synapse efficacy, which is basically the strength and effectiveness by which the neurotransmitter released at the synapse influences the postsynaptic neuron. And the learning in our brains, so at least one of the mechanisms how we can learn is by adjusting this synapses efficacies. So and we will take a look at the mechanism of how this is kind of facilitated in the brain, I guess. All right, now back to the book. So I guess that should cover most of this neuroscience basic. Okay, and each neuron has some kind of basic level of activity. So that is called background activity. And that can be also thought as a firing rate. And there is this phasic activity. So that would be can be thought of as when the activity of a neuron when it's active, like firing. So and now this communications between neurons involves some chemical. So basically, that's electrochemical signal, and the chemical component of it involves this neuromodulators, and the neuromodulator or neurotransmitter interesting for us in this case is dopamine. So the dopamine is essentially a thing that would communicate the reward signal to our brain on this level of neurons. And so we will consider this reward prediction error hypothesis of dopamine neuron activity. And there is experimental evidence that suggests that this dopamine is used to signal the reward prediction error. And so there are this dopamine producing neurons, and there are like two main dopamine pathways in the brain, and they connect to this part of a brain called striatum, which is responsible for planning, decision making, motivation, and reward perception. So many of the aspects of our cognition rely on this striatum, and it is also responsible for some of the motor activities. All right, and there were developed some models to relate the dopamine patterns to the learning and to this kind of reward prediction in the mammal brains. So there are these two regions from where the dopamine emerges as this substantia nigra, pars compacta, and ventral tegmental area. So this chapter is kind of heavy with this terms which are specific to neuroscience, and on occasion I'm feeling a bit lost because those are at least for now for me the words that do not bear any meaning. So got to try to remember what each of these does, but it's a bit difficult. But the main idea here is that the experiments show that the release of dopamine in the brain is kind of similar to what you would expect when applying TD learning. And the dopamine level itself is can be thought as a signal that conveys a TD error in this case. So here is another picture that shows how this kind of communication happens and how the dopamine is traveling from one neuron to another. Yeah, but I guess we can proceed to this experiments that showed some patterns of how dopamine level in monkey's brain relate to some stimulus and reward signals. So here you can see the activity of the. So here you can see this burst of the dopamine, and it was associated with some reward. It was apple juice given to monkeys, and there were these tasks that monkeys had to learn. And one of the tasks was there was like a trigger signal, and the monkey had to push the lever to get the reward after like observing this trigger cue. So there was a signal showing to a monkey that you need to push the lever, and after some time it was getting a reward. So and in the very beginning, the dopamine release was associated with the reward itself, but after some training, the dopamine release association shifted to this trigger cue, and it shows that essentially this dopamine, again, we can think of it as a like TD error signal, and it is showing us that the value of a state is higher than we had expected. And now there is another experiment. So there was like two lights, and one was showing which trigger to pull, and the other was kind of showing when to pull, and then again essentially the dopamine release was associated with the event that predicted the reward. And also also you can see that there is another pattern here, that when the reward does not occur when it's expected. So here you can see the first picture shows that when no reward was expected, and in that case, the rise in dopamine level was associated with the reward itself. The second shows that the reward was predicted. So we had some conditional stimuli that showed that we will get the monkey will get a reward, and therefore you can see that there is a peak of dopamine associated with the stimuli, but not associated with the reward. And the third plot shows that here we observe the conditional stimuli associated with the reward, but we do not get the reward. And you can see this decrease of dopamine level, and it goes lower than the baseline. And so that is so those are the experimental patterns showing how the dopamine activity behaves in our brain. So with that kind of knowledge of some experiments, we can construct a TD model that will correspond to the to this dopamine pattern here. And the TD model produced here was following. So we have a number of trials. So each trial can be sort of starting when at the moment when the trigger cue occurs, and the end of a trial, and the only reward we get is when the monkey gets an apple juice. And here you can see this learning patterns. So the uppermost one is a reward signal. We have 0 reward everywhere and some positive reward in the end. So early in the training, we have a 0 value function everywhere, and the TD error associated with this reward pattern and corresponding value function is as follows. It's like a high TD error when we get a reward, because we expected 0 reward but got some positive reward. So that's our TD error, right? And the third one, after some learning, basically after, so the beginning here is when the trigger cue occurs. So we expect to get the reward after some time. And in this case, the learned value function, we have like close to 1 discount factor here. So the value function is constant and equal to the reward value. And in this case, we have the TD error, the positive TD error associated with the pre-Q state, and 0 TD error everywhere else, because essentially, so the TD error is difference between the reward plus the value of the next state minus the value of this state. And here it's we kind of learned it, and the TD error is 0 everywhere. And if we do not get the reward in the end, then the TD error will be negative in the end. And you can see that this corresponds to the experimental results we observed in the previous section. But there are some like simplifications here, and also there are some discrepancies between this TD error model and what actually happens in the brain with respect to dopamine patterns. So the one discrepancy that was found, so imagine the reward occurs earlier than expected. In this case, in our TD value learning model, we will have like a positive TD error at the moment of time where the reward occurs, and a negative TD error at the end of a training, because in both cases we would observe something that is not expected. But in practice, when the reward was observed earlier than it was expected, actually there was no drop in dopamine at the time when we would expect reward, and there was a peak in dopamine when we got this unexpected early reward, but no drop of dopamine in the end, and that shows that our brain is like this patterns in the brain are probably more flexible and yeah, probably a bit more complicated than this simple TD model. And also this TD model, it does not account for control problem solving. So we do not learn the actions here. We only consider, in this simplified example, we only consider the value function evaluation. So that is kind of similar to the classical conditioning we discussed a week ago. All right, so and also about this positive TD error at the very beginning. So this first state is kind of said to be first reward predicting state, and the state before it is kind of regular state. So and here in this example we considered it to be like a trial by trial scenario, but in reality the trials are part of the continuing experience in the monkey's life, and probably it would be a bit different, but similar. So you can think of it as we before this first reward predictive state, nothing interesting happens in the monkey's life, and it cannot expect the reward, and then this cue trigger light shines, and then we have this burst of a dopamine here, and but the value of the state before the first reward predictive state, it will not be zero as shown here, but it will not be high because in most cases, like nothing happens, we shouldn't expect the next moment to this trigger light to shine, right? And on the other hand, there is this phenomena known as overtraining, and that would be if a monkey would be exposed to the experiment like multiple times in a short period of time, it will probably start expecting the trigger all the time. So you can think of it as getting the non-zero value for all of the states, and that again somewhat corresponds to the TD learning ideas introduced here. Right. So any comments about it? I guess that should make sense. Now we can move to another. So still it's simplified, but a bit more advanced model here. So we can view this reinforcement learning in a brain as HEctor Critic, so HEctor Critic paradigm. And as you remember, in HEctor Critic, we have an actor which corresponds to the function that learns a policy or a network. We can think of it as a neural net that learns a policy, and a critic, which can be thought of as a neural net that learns a value function. And then we use a value function to produce the TD error and better inform the actor learning. And so both actor and critic will be using the TD error as their learning signal, but in a different way. And so here are some diagrams showing what this actor critic would look like. So you can see here we have an environment that provides us some states and stimuli. Also, we have some feature representation of the state, which is then fed to the critic function and the actor function. And the actor function is supposed to produce the actions, and the critic function produces the value estimate. And we use that value estimate we compare the value estimate with the reward we observe, and we get the TD error associated with that value function and actual reward. And we will use that TD error as a learning signal for updating both critic and actor weights. And here is like a translation of that into brain language. So again, we have some environment, but this time this is not an actor agent in reinforcement learning framework, but our brain. So the state of our environment is processed by our cortex in multiple areas. So we embed the observation in some way, and then we feed those observations to the ventral how it's called, striatum, which can be sort of something similar as a critic in this case, and dorsal striatum that corresponds to the kind of the part of a brain that produces the signals how to act. And we also observe some rewards associated with the state of the environment we are situated in. And we have this VTA and SMC, the areas of the brain that produce dopamine. So we have this dopamine signal that will be communicated to both ventral and dorsal striatum to essentially update the efficacies of the connections here. And in this way, essentially those connections that are relevant to the observation will be reinforced, and the connections that are that would be associated with bad outcomes would on contrary get negative reinforcement. So that's the HEctor Critic view of our brain. And again, to understand how the learning going on, we get back to these formulas here, which are really similar to the gradient-based HEctor Critic learning. Essentially, those are the same. And as you might see, the difference between HEctor and Critic update rule is only in this how the eligibility traces are updated. So again, we assume that our brain keeps track of what what neurons activity is eligible for the outcomes we observe, and this eligibility trace is used to assign the learning signal to different connections between neurons. And you can see here that the eligibility trace associated with the critic is updated with a gradient of value function, and the eligibility trace associated with the HEctor learning is updated with a policy gradient. So those are the analogy between reinforcement learning and the learning that occurs in brain of mammals. So essentially the difference between these two eligibility traces. So the eligibility trace associated with critic is it does not depend on the action, and in this case the action is an activity of a postsynaptic neuron. So we only update like a firing rate of the neuron, and it not firing rate, but the update is done or eligibility is assigned based on the activity of the presynaptic neuron. But in case of the HEctor part, the eligibility trace is contingent on actions, and by contingency on action we mean that it depends on the activity of the postsynaptic neuron. So not only the input that a presynaptic neuron provides, but also the response of a postsynaptic neuron to the input. Okay, so that is the idea behind this HEctor Critic interpretation of a brain learning, and then we have this I don't know, maybe a bit far-stretching example where we represent the actor where each unit of an actor is this Bernoulli logistic unit. Essentially, it can be between 0 and 1. It's either like when it's 1, it's firing, and when it's 0, it's like not firing. Yeah, so it's passive. And the updates can be done based on which neurons were active at that point in time. So that would be our policy representation. In this case, would correspond to the activity of certain neurons. And yeah, but that again, still there are a lot of questions of how close is this to what actually happens in the brain. So, and the authors here in the book mention that many of the things discussed here can be true or somewhat true, can be like a step towards the understanding of the brain functioning, but also those can be wrong and like incorrect approximations to the actual learning. So as we know, what happens in brain is not backpropagation. So there was found no evidence that our brain implements something like a backpropagation. So the learning happens differently from what we have in deep learning. But yeah, there are some models. So this spike time independent plasticity model, and yeah, I cannot say I understand this in depth, but yeah, I guess the idea is that each neuron is kind of assigned this eligibility based on its activity, and then the activity or patterns in activity associated with positive rewards are reinforced, and the connection is like strengthened, and the activity associated with bad outcomes is discouraged in a brain. So okay, and then we have this idea of hedonistic neurons, and what it describes is that the eligibility trace of each neuron activity is kind of embedded in all of what's happening with subject in the environment, and there are this feedback loops that kind of associate the periods of most activity with particular neurons, and they mentioned that the eligibility trace formulation that was used in this book with an exponential decay is like a simplification of what's going on actually, but we do not have really precise models of the mechanism that assigns this eligibility traces in the brain actually, and hopefully once better mechanisms are discovered from either the neuroscience side or from reinforcement learning side, those can be act as a replacement for this simplified exponentially weighted eligibility traces function. And also they give this example that kind of shows is supposed to reinforce the Klopf's hedonistic neuron hypothesis somehow, but honestly I haven't understood the connection between those precisely. So we have this example of the behavior of this bacterium, and this bacterium is very simple. It's a single cell organism that can move in the liquid environment by rotating a hair-like structures on its surface, and the way it rotates these structures depends on the chemical media it is in, and if it moves to the attractive media, it will so it can change the direction, but by rotating this flagella in opposite directions, and how often it does change the direction depends on whether it moves to the attractive area or to the repellent area. So you can think of it moving in the direction of a gradient of the good media, but it does it somewhat stochastically. And yeah, I think I do understand the example, but I'm not sure how it relates to this hedonistic neuron hypothesis. Yeah, so maybe that kind of shows us that by basically optimizing the function of each individual neuron, we can get the right behavior in the complex system. But yeah, I'm not sure about it. If you have an opinion regarding this, please share. All right, so that's this hedonistic neuron hypothesis, and it leads us to the idea of collective reinforcement learning. So in this case, we can view each neuron as producing some signal. Here it's denoted like as an action vector signal A, and the reward signal is so that would be a simplified view again, but we can think that the same reward signal is conveyed to all the neurons. And in this case, this can be viewed as team, like collaborative learning task. And yeah, we can view it as a multi-agent reinforcement learning problem solving this collaborative task. And there are a bunch of questions regarding this, and for example, how do we explore? So one way to make this exploration in the multi-agent environment is by making the behavior of each agent individually explorative, but that might be not the most efficient way to do it, because probably you might want to explore some particular combinations, not just a random combination, but I'm not sure how it's actually done in a brain. And there is also this phenomenon known as lateral inhibition, where so like if one neuron is highly active, it will inhibit the neighboring neurons from activity. So, and that kind of shows that the credit assignment should be done in some kind of distributed sparse fashion in a brain. And yeah, but again, we do not go into details of it in this chapter. So yeah, there is another nuance in a brain. So we have this the dorsolateral striatum and dorsomedial striatum, and there were some experiments like showing that by inactivating this area of the brain, we can force animals to behave more in a habitual fashion or in the goal-directed fashion, and that can be thought of again as a model-free and model-based processes. But the fact is that these two regions are structurally similar, and so it occurs that in a brain for model-based and model-free behaviors are like regulated by a very similar like functionally, or not functionally, but structurally parts of the brain. And that is interesting, because in reinforcement learning, we have this distinctions between model-free and model-based control. So there are some kind of discrepancies between what the reinforcement learning does and what we understand about the brain. Yeah. And finally, in the end of the chapter, we allude to the addiction problem, and it also depends on the dopamine in many cases. So many of the addictive substances are responsible for high peaks in the dopamine, and those are much higher than what we observe in a natural environment. And there are some theories relating the basically the mistakes in TD learning and the dopamine neuron activity associated with addictions, but I'm not sure if this all is correct. I've briefly checked, and there is a particular protein associated with addiction, and that association is also very strong. And also there is, so I've been listening to the like a podcast talk by this guy named Dr. Andrew Huberman, and he talks about neuroscience from more like, I would say, anthropocentric perspective, and he has this talk on the dopamine. And the fact that is not mentioned here in this chapter is that high peaks of dopamine are associated with a later like drop in the baseline, and essentially, so in as we discussed, this dopamine level can be thought of as this learning signal for a human, and when you have a high level of dopamine, you like are active and willing to learn and willing to achieve things. So that's kind of what motivates us to seek the reward, right? And this drop in the baseline after high peaks in dopamine are, I don't know, some are somewhat contradicting, I guess, this TD learning framework again. So, and probably are another sign of that what's going on actually in the brain is a bit more complicated. So, so in case of reinforcement learning and like TD learning, we do not actually care if there are high peaks in the reward signal or not. But in reality, it's kind of recommended to avoid very high peaks of dopamine that are like not sustainable, because they decrease this baseline level of dopamine. And essentially that is also what can be responsible for addiction. because you know, you after like, for example, the cocaine addiction is based on the dopamine, and when you take cocaine, your dopamine level increases like I think like 2.5 times. And for example, for comparison, um, the increase in dopamine level associated with sexual activity is about 2 times higher than a baseline. So you can see that the cocaine is a strong like dopamine source, but after this high peak of dopamine, you have this kind of drop of dopamine, and also because of this relation of dopamine and what you seek to do, as we discussed, you might basically switch to the addictive substance as a main source of dopamine for you, but it kind of gets you to this feedback loop when you get trying to get more and more dopamine from the same substance, but also this dopamine peaks are getting lower and lower as you proceed, and after some time the addictive substance does not bring you the level of dopamine you wanted, but you have also decreased your baseline a lot, and that is why it's hard to get out of it. So and I guess there are some relations to reinforcement learning again, and maybe one of those are the fact that the reward signal is really constructed in a complex fashion in human brain, and also basically the level of dopamine that our brain produces it depends a lot on the subjective experiences we have. So if you think of the activity as rewarding, you will have a high level of dopamine, and if you think of it as not rewarding, you will not have this high level of dopamine associated with the activity. And you can see that it does not directly relies on the environment. It more like our interpretation of the environment. And maybe to construct, to build like a more complex learning agent, we also need some, you know, more complex way to construct the reward function, to reward the diverse behaviors and balance the exploration and exploitation based on the like not by kind of, you know, injecting some noise into our behavior, but by balancing the reward associated with well-learned activities versus the unexplored activities. So yeah, so there is a lot of stuff that going on in human brains and the mammal brains that makes us, you know, able to adapt to new environment while also exploiting the current environment well enough to survive. And yeah, I guess there are a lot more intuitions that maybe we can adopt from the nature to reinforcement learning and AI in general. So that's my take on the chapter, and I'm not sure if I've communicated all the ideas, but yeah.
Oh, that was great, Otto. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ardo. There was one thing we didn't go on there. I was intrigued by, like, he was like talking about some experiments they did where they like genetically altered, I think it was like fruit flies or something, so that they could control or like inhibit the dopamine that was produced by some of their neurons by targeting lasers at them. I wasn't sure, did it mean fire a laser at the whole fly, or is it fire a laser at individual neurons to stop them? Have you any ideas on that?
Oh,
It was in, I can't remember which section exactly it was in. It was like describing an experiment where, yeah, like they had some genetic modified neurons or something.
let me try to find it maybe, and we can try to discuss. As I remember, they mentioned that the dopamine function in the fly's brain was different from those in mammal brains, right?
Yeah, yeah, I think it did the opposite or something, didn't it? But
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it was more, I was just intrigued to know, like, did they sort of take the skull off a fruit fly so as they could target individual neurons with lasers, or did it mean hit the whole fly with a laser? But yeah, like it didn't describe in the chapter sort of the detail of that or whatever. But
Oh, yeah, I'm not sure about it. I
I was
can't.
just intrigued about how they'd done that. I'll have to go and research it.
Yeah, but as I have listened to a podcast with this guy with, I will maybe post a link, and he talks about epigenetics, and I believe there are techniques to temporarily alter the genetic code even in humans currently, and I think those are used for some purposes. So yeah, maybe that is somehow related. I don't know. So
Yeah,
I will try to find the links, and maybe that will also be interesting. Yeah, maybe someone has to share any results. I don't know, on some reinforcement learning problems you have looked at. And if not, I guess we can finish for today and maybe decide if we meet next Sunday or not. And yeah. So I think, Terence, you are the only one based in US, right?
Yes, I am. So, I mean, if everyone that wants to have it, I mean, I'll be available on that Sunday, so that's fine. We don't have to miss because of me, for sure.
Yeah, but I don't think that's a big deal. You know, we can skip a week. Yeah, maybe it will. So the next chapter, let me check it. I think it's those examples. Yeah, applications and case studies. And I guess we can maybe it would be a good idea, you know, to uh, if anyone wants, you know, to take a particular example, you know, research paper or examples they mention in a book, and you know, prepare a short presentation on it, or like review, and like communicate the main ideas associated with that example if you would be interested. So we can skip the next week and like 2 weeks later, we can have this. If you'd like to take any of the examples, you can post on Slack and present it during the next session, I guess. And I don't think we need to limit ourselves to the examples from this chapter. There are they speak about this AlphaGo, but there are also AlphaZero, MuZero, and so they have this AlphaGo 0 example, stuff like that. Yeah, so if anyone has some topic of interest, it would be nice if you present it during the next session. That's what I'm saying. Hi.
Yeah, sounds fine to me.
So at this point, I guess based on what I'm hearing, Artur, we're just going to skip next week. Mayank, you okay with that?
Yep, I think so. If everybody is agreeing on that, then yeah, let's skip the next week. And the week after next, we shall be back with the applications and the case studies of it.
Yeah, that's one I'm definitely interested in.
Yeah.
The application outside of just, trying to teach a game to do something. I saw this one article where a guy was using it for finance related activities. So somebody has some examples around that. I would definitely be interested in hearing those.
Yeah, at the minute I'm doing like a Kaggle. I've just signed up for a Kaggle competition. And yeah, within that, there's like quite a few sort of notebooks where people are using reinforcement learning on it. To try and
post
predict.
that so I can see which one that is?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Oh, thanks.
Thanks, Steve.
Right, cool. I guess see you everybody in 2 weeks, and looking forward for some nice applications of reinforcement learning.
Thanks, Artur. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks
Everyone.
Enjoy your Thanksgiving and see you in 2 weeks.
Yes, sir. Take care.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers.